We begin my top 24 remaining quarterback rankings. Remember that quarterbacks who are playing on Thursday night or if they are on bye are not included in these rankings. So if you notice somebody missing and they fit under that criteria, that's why. We begin with quarterbacks that I think are mid to low in QB2s. We have Gardner Minshew, Tommy DeVito, Bryce Young, Cooper Rush, Will Levis, and A-Rich. Gardner Minshew has been a little bit of a mixed bag. There have been 3 performances this season in which he's had 5 or fewer points, including one in which he lost us points. He did have over 17 points this past week in a 4-point per touchdown format. But against Denver, I would absolutely, in every way, shape, and form, try to avoid starting him. Then we have Tommy DeVito. So he gets his first start. It's interesting. He was the QB3, and now he's jumped up to being the QB1. While it is a great matchup against Tampa Bay, Tommy DeVito has only passed for over 200 yards once in his NFL career. He does have rushing upside. He's had 40 yards and 70 yards in 2 games, respectively, in the minimal amount of time in which he started. But I just don't think he's very good. And so he definitely has some upside, but I think it's an incredibly risky play. Then we have Bryce Young against Kansas City. So it isn't a very good matchup. However, I would imagine the Panthers are going to be losing this game rather handily. And so I do think he's going to get quite a bit of passing volume. And he has scored double-digit points in 2 of the past 3 games in a 4-point touchdown format. I do think that due to the immense amount of passing volume they're probably going to need to have, that he's a better start than Tommy DeVito and Gardner Minshew, but I would try to avoid starting him this week if possible. And now we have Cooper Rush against Washington. It's been a little bit of a mixed bag. In a partial game in which he took over for Dak Prescott, he had over 11 points. Then in his first actual start, he lost us fantasy points. He had a little bit over 16 this past week. I still think he's an incredibly risky player because he's just not the best real-life quarterback compared to the rest of the NFL. And so for that reason, even in a decent matchup against Washington, I would really try to avoid playing him. And now we have Will Levis against Houston. So he's had 19 and 15 points in the past 2 weeks. I still think he's a pretty risky play, though. I want to see more consistency from him because before he was injured, he was absolutely atrocious. And so even in a plus matchup, I still think he's a pretty risky play. And finally, we have Anthony Richardson. So in my opinion, in plus matchups, he's a pretty high upside start. In poor matchups, I think he's incredibly risky. He probably has he definitely has one of the high ceilings in the NFL at the quarterback position, but he also has one of the lower floors. And so it's kind of a pick your poison thing in terms of when you want to start him. But in plus matchups, I would feel a lot more comfortable ranking him higher. But I do think he's going to have a tough time against Detroit. Now we have quarterbacks that I think are mid to high in QB2s. We have CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, Sam Darnold, Drake May, Patrick Mahomes, and Matt Stafford. Regarding CJ Stroud, in 2 of the past 5 weeks, he hasn't even finished with double-digit fantasy points, and a little bit over 12 points is the most in which he's had. I do think he has a little bit of a better game. He is getting Nico Collins back. And this past week, he should have had, a 70 or 80-yard touchdown to Nico Collins that was called back due to an ineligible man downfield. So I do think that the ceiling is definitely going to be boosted immensely with Nico Collins back, but it's still a tough matchup against Tennessee. And so I do think that with the return of Nico for a second week, and he's probably going to play a couple more snaps than he did this past week. I believe he played 47%. That he definitely has his floor and ceiling raised. It's still a really tough matchup, and he really doesn't provide a ton of stuff on the ground. Then we have Caleb Williams against Minnesota. So this past week, he had 70 rushing yards. He was playing a lot more confidently. I do think that it's a little bit of a boost because they changed coordinators. I do think he's going to be slowed down a little bit more as time progresses once they adjust to the new offensive coordinator and his tendencies. But I still think that with him playing more confidently, touchdown regression to the mean is bound to happen at some point. He isn't turning the ball over, but he also just hasn't been scoring us touchdowns. I really like that he's at least shown us a ton of rushing upside this past week. I think against Minnesota, he's going to be running for his life. I still think that I think he is going to get a passing touchdown in this game and going to have a solid rushing floor. It's just until the offensive line gets better and they really get some coaching stability, it's going to be really tough in mediocre to poor matchups to trust Caleb Williams to be anything more than a QB2. Now we have Sam Darnold against the Chicago Bears. This past week, he was fantastic. He ended up being the QB9. This week, he's playing against Chicago, though. They allow the fewest amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks. And so I do think that we need to temper expectations for him specifically this week. Drake May is playing against Miami. So, fun fact, he has scored double-digit fantasy points in every game in which he's started so far. I think that continues against Miami. He also threw for over 250 yards and 2 touchdowns this past week. I do think that he's going to have a turnover this game, and I think he's going to salvage his day on the ground because he has been very good for us on the ground. And I think better days are ahead, and he's going to be, in general, as time progresses, ranked higher in these rankings. But he has been a little bit turnover prone early in his career. And so I do think that that makes him a QB2 this week, but he still has a good amount of upside. Patrick Mahomes is playing against Carolina this week. I think he has a decent fantasy day. You know, they've really been running the ball a ton with Kareem Hunt. And so I do think that lowers his ceiling, but I still think he's going to tear apart the Carolina Panthers defense because he's the best quarterback in real life. And they are one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And so I think you definitely start him with confidence as a QB2 with potentially QB1 upside, but we've also only seen one top 10 finish from him this year. And so the upside that we had traditionally seen with him just really hasn't shown itself. And so it's a little bit challenging in general to rank him higher than a high-end QB2. Now we have Matthew Stafford against Philadelphia. So listen, it is one of the worst matchups. I think purely due to the potential for them to be needing to pass quite a bit to keep up with Philly and vice versa, that Matthew Stafford is a relatively strong play this week. If it was an advantageous matchup that would necessitate him to throw the ball, he would be ranked way higher in these rankings. But I do think that due to total passing volume and the fact that in general, at least, he's had quite a few good games with his full supporting cast back, that he's back to stay as a high in QB2, low in QB1 for us in fantasy purposes, contingent on the matchups. If you like what you're hearing and seeing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. By the way, make sure you check out my tight end, running back, and wide receiver rankings as they come out. Tight ends and quarterbacks are coming out on Friday, and running backs and wide receivers are on Saturday. Thanks. Now we have quarterbacks that I think are mid to low in QB1s this week. We have Tua, Geno Smith, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, Bo Nix, and Justin Herbert. After a little bit of a slow start, Tua had over 200 passing yards and 3 touchdowns to no interceptions this past week. We know that he really doesn't offer anything on the ground, so it necessitates him being able to obviously pass the ball through the air for his production to happen. I don't think he's going to have too much of an issue against New England. I do think they're going to beat New England, and so I think he's going to be a safe low-end QB1. I just don't think he's going to have, they're going to need to give him the total amount of volume that they do some weeks in order to win that would push him higher up these fantasy rankings. Now we have Geno Smith against Arizona. So he's had 6 top 12 finishes this season. I think he's going to have his 7th this week, although I don't think it's going to be, an elite QB1 finish this week. But I do think that this projects to be a relatively high-scoring game between the two teams, and I do think he's going to need to pass the ball quite a bit to stay in this game. And he does have the full selection of wide receivers to throw to now. Now we have Jordan Love against San Fran. So they are the 8th best team in terms of stopping quarterbacks from producing fantasy points. I will say, though, after his 20-point performance against the Bears, I do think that he's a safe play this week as a low-end QB1, even in a tough matchup. I think they're going to have to throw the ball early and often to keep up with San Fran. And so for that reason, due to passing volume alone, I do like him as a low-end QB1. Now we have Brock Purdy against Green Bay. Caleb Williams was able to move the ball down the field against them. I don't think Brock Purdy's going to have any issue. And in 3 of the past 4 games, he scored a rushing touchdown, and I think that continues this week. Now we have Bo Nix against the Las Vegas Raiders. So he's had 5 top 12 finishes this season at QB. And in the previous time in which he faced the Vegas Raiders, he finished as a QB8. I think he's going to repeat as a QB8, although that is pure coincidence. And he's also thrown 9 touchdowns to just 1 interception in the past 3 games. And so he is absolutely balling, and I love him as a mid QB1. And now we have Justin Herbert against Baltimore. Fun fact about him In the first 7 weeks, he didn't have a single top 12 finish. Well, the past 4 weeks, he's been a top 12 quarterback in each of them. I think that continues against Baltimore, and I do think he's going to need to pass the ball quite a bit to stay in this game, and I love him as a mid QB1 this week. Now we have quarterbacks that I think are mid to elite QB1s that I think have a realistic chance at being the QB1 overall this week. We have Jared Goff, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jayden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. So Jared Goff has been a top 12 quarterback 4 times this season, including this past week where he was the QB1. Look, I think he is going to tear apart Indianapolis. I don't think he's going to be the QB1, but I think he's going to be. They are terrible against outside wide receivers. Hint, hint, Jameson Williams. And so I think JMO is going to have a pretty good day. And as well as Jared Goff, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to tear them apart as well. And so I really am high on the entirety of the Lions offense this week. Now we have Kyler Murray against Seattle. They're coming out of a bye week. He's had 4 QB1 finishes this season. And so I don't think anything is going to stop him against Seattle. I think it's going to be quite a high scoring game. And I do think he scores a rushing touchdown. And so now we have Baker Mayfield. He is playing against the Giants. Fun fact about him, he has only been outside of the top 12 quarterbacks 3 times this season, and he has 5 top 5 finishes. He has been on a tear. And guess what? He gets Mike Evans back. Yeah, I think he's a top 5 QB once again, and I think he obliterates the Giants. And now we have Jayden Daniels against Dallas. So Micah Parsons is back, so that obviously isn't ideal for him. Defenses have started to figure out the Cliff Kingsbury scheme, and so he has started to slow down a little bit. But I don't think Dallas is going to be able to contain him in any way, shape, or form, and I do think he's a top 3 play this week. And now we have Lamar Jackson against the Chargers. One fun fact about him, there has only been 1 occurrence this season in which he has not been a QB1. You heard that right. This past week against the Steelers is the only week. The Chargers defense is formidable, but it is not the Steelers, and it's not a division opponent as well. I think that played a factor. And so I think Lamar Jackson is going to tear apart the Chargers, and he's really about as matchup proof as you could possibly imagine. And the evidence backs that up considering there's only been 1 occurrence in which he's not a QB1. Now we have Jalen Hurts against the Rams. Fun fact about him, in each of the past 5 games, he scored a rushing touchdown, and he has 9 touchdowns on the ground in the past 5 games. I think that continues, and I think he has 2 touchdowns through the air in what should be a high-scoring game between them and the Rams. And so to conclude, quarterbacks that I think are mid to low-end QB2s this week, we have Gardner Minshew, Tommy DeVito, Bryce Young, Cooper Rush, Will Levis, and A-Rich. QBs that I think are mid to high-end QB2s, we have Stroud, Caleb, Sam Darnold, Drake May, Mahomes, and Stafford. QBs that I think are mid to low-end QB1s, we have Tua, Geno Smith, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, Bo Nix, and Justin Herbert. And then quarterbacks that I think are mid to elite QB1s this week are Jared Goff, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jayden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. All right, you know the drill. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, make sure you remember that if somebody played on Thursday night or if they're on bye, they're not included in these rankings. So if you notice somebody missing, that's why. And make sure to check out my wide receiver, running back, and tight end rankings as they come out. And please like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Thanks.